Welcome to Transform Now, a podcast focused on intelligent automation and brought to you by SS&C Blue Prism. On this program, we talk about how organizations globally are rethinking the way they operate, utilizing process orchestration and AI-enabled digital workers to free up humans to do the work that matters most. We also share insights and tips on how you can embrace this new way of working and unleash your full potential. Let's get into the show.
Hello everyone, Brad Hairston here with SS&C Blue Prism. Today on the Transform Now podcast, I am thrilled to have as my guest Tom Davenport, a world-renowned author and expert in areas such as AI, analytics, information and knowledge management, process management, and enterprise systems. He is the President's Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College. He's also the author or co-author of over 20 books and over 250 articles. I will be talking with Tom today about how companies are handing the torch of technology development to their citizens, if you will, in many different areas. It's a hot topic today, and it's the subject of an upcoming book that Tom is co-authoring. Tom, welcome back. It's good to have you back on for your third time, although it's been quite a while. In fact, I think the last time I had you on, GenAI wasn't even a thing, if I'm not mistaken.
Was there ever a time? It's hard to remember, Brad. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, the last time you were on, we discussed your book, co-written with Stephen Miller, about real success stories with traditional AI. That was super interesting. And I know you've published another book on AI since then, Tom, but today, we're going to talk about this book that you're in the process of writing with Ian Barkin, who's definitely a friend of Blue Prisms. He's been on the podcast as well. And the topic that you two are writing on is citizen-led technology. So what inspired you and Ian to explore this topic? And why do you think it's a significant trend today?
I should say that, Ian's had a long career in automation, and I sort of dabble in the automation side, but our book is a little broader because it covers citizen-led technology, broadly speaking, from low-code, no-code application development to citizen automation to citizen data science to citizen web page development, app development, all that stuff. So I got interested in it primarily from an automation and data science standpoint. I'd done a little bit of work on the low-code, no-code side, but I think all of these things are coming together and the categories are overlapping. The automation companies are dealing with AI to a greater degree with intelligent automation, and the AI companies are trying to automate and so on. So it just seemed like a good topic. And I was always interested in democratizing data science because there were so few data scientists available. And so really a need for broadening that out, I think. And just in terms of if a company wants to digitally transform itself, the odds that it can do that with just a central IT group doing all of the work, little unlikely, I think. So this used to be, I think, an area that was in some disrepute from IT leaders, and they call it shadow IT or rogue IT or something like that.
Yep.
But seems to have come out of the closet now. It's not in the shadows anymore. And a lot of companies are actively supporting and driving it.
Yeah. Let me ask you just about the IT group. You mentioned the way they viewed it in the past. I think that is true. Every time it came up, it was an area that they were not thrilled about, and they would kind of bend over backwards to try to mitigate all the risk associated with some group within the business, whatever it is, whether it's data science or automation or coding. Has the attitude on the behalf of the IT group, you think, significantly changed?
Well, not at every company, but certainly at some of them. So we're going to profile in the book, really big companies, Shell, Chevron in the oil industry, and Johnson & Johnson in pharmaceuticals, and BMW in automobile manufacturing, who are really into this in a big way are educating lots of people, have selected their tool sets and say, go off and make this happen, people. They obviously need some sort of governance if they're going to make it successful, but they're certainly open to the idea of large numbers of people participating in this kind of activity.
Well, we've definitely been hearing the term citizen for several years now. You mentioned citizen data scientist, citizen developer. We've seen citizen led automation in the Blue Prism world. Do you believe that this trend is exacerbated now because of the advent of Gen AI?
I do. And I think probably every tool within information technology will have a generative front end, where you specify what you want in a conversational manner and out will pop a system of some sort. And then you can sort of edit it after that in the same way we'd edit a blog post or whatever. And I'm seeing that already in a number of companies. AT&T, for example, is one of the companies I've talked to recently, and they're quite into citizen automation and citizen data science. And in both cases, they think that generative AI will make a big difference, not only creating the tools, but in helping to find the needed data and so on. And so I think it's going to be an enormous influence on this citizen or amateur
Right.
development of technology.
Yeah. I mentioned that you and I have not talked since Gen AI broke onto the scene. So let me just ask you quickly, do you think this is the biggest technology disruption since the internet, in your opinion?
Well, yeah, I do. I guess I do. I have a little bit of a problem with the number of people who think that AI didn't really exist until generative
Uh-huh.
AI. And a number of my colleagues at Babson, for example, were never interested in AI. I've been teaching it for a number of years and nobody paid any attention. And now they're all interested. But
Right.
I think this is an amazing capability. And I'm, of course, as a human being, a little worried about what it's going to do for us humans or to us humans over time. I
Sure.
still believe in general, as I did on our last podcast, that augmentation is a more likely outcome in large scale automation, but it's got to give you pause. I think if you're not paranoid, you're not paying attention to this technology. So yeah, I think it's quite amazing. And I think we're still in the very early days, particularly for code generation, workflow generation, data science. I mean, there's a whole data science capability that most people don't even know exists. Even people
Yeah.
in the data science area, this advanced data analysis capability of ChatGPT really blows me away. And I tell my students all about it, certainly.
Yeah. And I know that you conducted a survey that I think said something like 5% of Gen AI pilots have moved to production, if I'm not mistaken, something like
I've
that.
started when that read six.
Oh, 6%. Oh my goodness. Okay.
I've actually got a couple of different surveys, and one I think did say 5 and one did say 6. But
Okay. Okay. I
yeah,
think I read that one. Yeah. Okay.
definitely in the early stages as far as putting these capabilities into production. And so that's, I think, something that many organizations will need to work on over the next year or so, because that's the only way to really get economic value out of it. But huge amount of potential, no doubt about that.
Sure. Sure. And Tom, I would imagine you definitely appreciate the way that the former flavor of AI is now being called GoFi, an acronym for good old fashioned AI.
I've heard classical, traditional,
Yeah.
legacy AI
Yeah.
has a certain negative connotation to it, but I wish we had a better term. Somebody the other day called it predictive AI, but I
Uh-huh.
thought, hold it, generative AI predicts,
Predicts it as
just
well.
like any
Right.
other kind. So,
An interesting topic for sure. So back on the citizen movement, you're writing a book on this, co-authoring with Ian. So clearly you think this is a very important topic and it's something company leaders need to understand, they need to embrace it. But just how important do you think it is to the health of companies going forward?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's fair to say that most of the activity that's produced by citizens is fairly tactical in nature. A small automation for a department or a work group or something like that, a small application with low code, no code. Probably you're not going to be doing mission critical data science work with citizens leading the charge.
Mhm.
But I think there's another way you can look at it. I mean, there are two ways that it can be quite strategic, I think. And one is or maybe it's three, two and a half. One is the scale that you can achieve. And you have a company like J&J, for example,
Hmm.
through automation, they had a goal of first saving 500 million and then saving 1 billion. I think 500 million was over 3 years, and the next two, they're going to turn it into 1 billion. So billion here, 1 billion there, not in
Hmm.
terms of the real money eventually. So if you're doing this on a broad enough scale, I think you can make a big difference to companies. And then there's the kind of experimentation and innovation idea in a way that we have for a long time, I think, encouraged people to experiment with their processes through continuous improvement types of tools like
Hmm.
Lean and Six Sigma. And so we give them different colored belts depending on how good they are at it. And
Hmm.
there was a belief that if we did this broadly enough, we'd really ultimately transform the operations of the company kind of bottom up. But the problem was we never really had a technology component to
Hmm.
all of that. It was just the workflow. It's very labor intensive to even understand the workflow. And if you take the ability to now create those new process designs and automate them, that could make a huge difference, I think. And then thirdly, or second and a half, another aspect of that innovation is in some industries, you have, I think most of the key innovations are coming from people who understand the cutting edge of the business domain. A great example is pharmaceuticals, where most large pharmaceuticals these days, yeah, they're still hiring chemists and biologists and so on, but they want them to understand how to do data science and how to automate workflows and so on. And so the most interesting developments in that field, I think, are at the intersection of the technology and the more traditional types of science like biology and chemistry. So that also, if you can develop new drugs a lot faster as a result, that is clearly got to be very strategic. And as we were discussing, they're all got to be thinking about how do I use generative AI to, in the same way you predict the next word, make the next amino acid or protein or molecule or whatever. And it appears to be capable of doing that, although it's still really early days.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. So, Tom, how should organizations ensure ongoing skill development and knowledge transfer within their citizen led programs?
Well, it's funny. Ian and I were having a discussion about this morning because it's pretty common these days to create little, I don't know, hubs or marketplaces of citizen developed solutions of one type or another. Maybe it's of automation workflows, or maybe it's of data science features or models, even that have already been developed. But that, I think, doesn't really happen without some effort on the part of the organization. And in a sense, what you really need are knowledge managers who are going to curate that and say, okay, we'll add this one to the marketplace because it's unique, but this one looks a lot like someone we was already in it. We don't want to confuse people with 6 different versions of the same thing. And so there's that curation capability that's necessary. I think there's a big kind of, I don't know, cruise ship social director role involved here too, of having frequent meetups and getting people talking to each other so they exchange the knowledge on a bottom up level. And I think some of the governance approaches say, okay, you can develop this and we'll record it as something that's useful to the enterprise, but there have to be at least two people who know
Mm.
about this. I think it was a guy at Amtrak who was saying this, that so if one person leaves, there's somebody else who can tell everybody what it's supposed to do or maybe maintain a little bit. I mean, I do think at some point, generative AI will be able to do a lot of the documentation for us and maybe translation into new languages or whatever. But right now, I think there's still a pretty human role involved.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So what have you found to be the most common challenges and risks of citizen-led programs in your research? And then how do you recommend that companies address those?
Well, I think we still have these sort of silos, like any other technology silo of, okay, is that low code, no code application development? And that's two silos really, because I guess low code tends to be for citizens and no code is more likely to be for IT professionals, or no, it's vice versa.
Mhm.
Although there are some that cross the boundary a little bit, some tools. There's the automation world, there's the data science world. Even though these capabilities are starting to merge together a little bit, there's still those silos, and they tend to come from kind of different departments within organizations. And there's still this gap in many cases between the people with the business knowledge and the relevant professionals, be they IT professionals, automation professionals, data science professionals. And so we really like to start closing those gaps, and everybody would become a hybrid of sorts. I think that is slowly taking place. And as
Mhm.
I say, in pharmaceuticals, you have these people who are combined machine learning people and genetic biology people, but those are still hard to find. And most people are not trained in that combination of things. There are a few education programs in that particular industry that are starting to do that in computational biology and so on, but we don't really have that yet. So right now, we still need these intermediaries in many cases who can translate across that boundary, connectors or translators or purple people, they're sometimes referred to as. So it'll be nice if we got to this world. I think Gartner refers to them as fusion teams of
Mhm.
professionals and amateurs and citizens. But it'd be nice if everybody was sort of at that hybrid standpoint and we could all talk to each other and not,
Mhm.
not have so many silos.
Yeah. In your research for this book, have you found that company culture and leadership support, that those both play a big role in driving the success of these programs?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Brad, because there are some companies that have really made it happen. And I wouldn't say necessarily it's CEO level leadership, but it's at least C level leadership, C
Mhm.
level in terms of technology and C level in terms of marketing or research or whatever. I think that is quite critical. There have been a number of kind of bottom up companies where there was, maybe a director or something like that who said, this is really important to our business, or maybe a VP, and we're going to try to get it going. And it has succeeded in a few cases, but there are a fair number also that just die on the vine for
Mhm.
lack of support and resources. So I do think some level of air cover is really critical. I think it would be better if it were quite senior and quite strategic in the orientation, because
Mhm.
then you start to get some of those strategic benefits. And then there's also this issue of motivation for the citizens. So came across this one guy who worked for, I won't say who it is, but it's a very large, big box home development and home building kind of
Mhm.
company. And they were doing some work in assortment planning and demand planning and so on, lots of different SKUs, lots of different data. And somebody figured out an automated way to pull all of that data together using one of these citizen oriented tools and saved a huge amount of time and effort. And so as a result, they were able to do a lot more assortment planning to make a lot more money for this company. There's some estimates that it's almost $1 billion of increased profit because of the extra assortment and demand planning that they were able to do. And so
Hmm.
what did they do to this guy who came up with this great solution? Well, they did name him an employee of the year, and they gave him a $50 gift card and a picture with the CEO. And somehow the rewards don't seem quite proportional to the value that was achieved there. And we've
Yeah.
even seen some companies, I mean, Ian discovered this. There are a couple of groups on online discussion boards called the overemployed, people
Hmm.
who are remote workers who are doing 2 to 5 to even 9 or 10 remote jobs with the aid of automation, citizen automation, and code development tools. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, that is one way to get your compensation, I guess, increased markedly. But we would hope that companies could figure out ways to reward it a little bit more generously to
Yeah.
motivate people to do this kind of work.
Yeah. As you've talked to so many companies and heard their stories, what have you found to be the key benefits that they've recognized going down this path and really embracing citizen-led efforts, regardless of what area it's in?
Yeah. Well, I think there is an economic benefit. Not enough companies calculate the economic benefits. And
Hmm.
you've probably seen this a lot. People, particularly in terms of automation, they calculate minutes
Hmm.
saved. And as one CFO said, we can't eat minutes. We need to convert that into dollars. But I think determining some of the value is key to what the resources companies are going to pour into this area will ultimately be.
Hmm.
So measurement is, I think, a key element in the long run. I think having champions in place to make this happen, and they're the sort of cruise ship social directors I was referring to earlier, who have the meetups and in many cases, I think, are effectively the knowledge managers
Hmm.
for the marketplaces and the solution hubs. Some air cover, as I suggested, some resources for it. I mean, at Shell, for example, they put a vice president in the IT organization in charge of this. And now they have, I forget exactly, maybe 35 people around the company who
Right.
are encouraging citizen development. And it's really been quite, I think, heartwarming in a way to see how
Mhm.
one guy that we interviewed was operations guy in a refinery in Louisiana. And he said, I used to turn valves for a living. And now I develop applications that benefit, in some cases, the whole world of this huge
Mhm.
multinational. So that's pretty inspiring, I think, in many cases. But you
Yeah.
have to have a certain level of support to make that happen.
There's a lot of talk these days about employee empowerment. Do you think citizen-led technology contributes to this and makes jobs more fulfilling while also keeping employees around longer?
Ultimately, my guess is that this will be what almost every employee is expected to do. And
Mhm.
I do think it'll be more fulfilling for employees. We've come across a fair number of people who are spending their entire days entering data into spreadsheets, moving data from one spreadsheet to another, et cetera. And not only does that cause errors, it's just not a very fulfilling way to work. And so I think it frees people up to think about much more important things, to be able to analyze some of that data instead of spending all their time mucking around with data entry and so on. So I
Mhm.
think it can make the job much more fulfilling if we don't treat these people as outlaws. And still, there are still some companies that say, those citizen tools, I'm not sure I really support it. One of my friends who's a data scientist said, I asked him, were they doing much with citizen data science? And his company, was a health insurance company, said, in general, we prefer not to put sharp knives in the hands of children. It's a really funny line, but the fact is the knives are going to get sharper and sharper all the time.
Oh, yes, they are. How funny.
One chief information officer of a big insurance company said to me, he said, half the time now when I go into a meeting, unless I knew the people already, I can't tell whether they're business people or IT people. The IT people know the business people know the IT, and it's just a much more sophisticated discussion about what the requirements are and how we might address them than we used to have before. I think that's a fantastic improvement, facilitated in part at least by citizen development and citizen familiarity with what can be done.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Tom, given your very long tenure in academia, how do you see the role of higher ed preparing college students for this citizen-led model that's becoming more prominent in the workplace?
Yeah, I think I've tried to say to some of my colleagues, Babson is always ranked number one for entrepreneurship, which is great. But I think we're going to, in a few years, be guilty of educational malpractice if we're not preparing people to not just come up with a business idea and a logo and find some funding and so on. They need to be able to build the systems to support these businesses and their tools to do that. And we will definitely be at fault if we don't equip them with those capabilities. And there are some people who are starting to focus on this issue of how do we create better entrepreneurs with tools to support their business from the beginning, rather than saying, okay, I have to go out and hire a bunch of nerds or engineers to build these capabilities, particularly for startups. You should be able to get to a minimum viable product pretty easily with some of the tools that are available today. And I think that we'll see that in many cases when I've talked to these citizen developers in companies, they have MBAs and so on, but they weren't really taught how to use these tools as MBAs. They had to figure it out on their own.
Right.
We should make them aware that almost no matter what you want to do with technology, there's a way that you can participate in the process, even if it's only as a member of a fusion team or something like that.
I recently saw an interview with the NVIDIA CEO. You may have seen it. He was talking about how
Bridge strike.
we used to tell everyone to go become a computer science major, computer engineering, but we're rapidly moving to a world where no one will need to code anymore. It'll all be completely accessible. And so it was an interesting quote. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, with Ian and another friend of mine who's a data scientist, we wrote a HVR article called "We're All Programmers Now," and we might have been a little bit premature, but I think we will all eventually be programmers, and all that will really matter is for us to know what we want. And I do think right now that the programmers who are using generative AI to generate code, the experienced ones do it much better than the entry-level ones because they know what they want. And at some point, maybe the generative AI will be smart enough to ask us so many intelligent questions that it can elicit what we want. But right now, I think there's certainly an advantage to having experience at having done this sort of thing. And that's one of the things I think citizen development tools can do. It gives you a sense of what your requirements are, and you'll be able to just talk it out to a generative AI system, and voila, there's your code.
Yeah, there you go. Awesome. Well, Tom, it's been a pleasure having you back on to talk about citizen-led development or automation or data science, fill in the blank. Lots of examples of that. And so we'll look forward to reading the book when it comes out that you and Ian are co-authoring. Do you have a target publish date yet or not yet?
Yeah, I think toward the end of this year and of 2024. And the title is going to be, I have to credit Ian for this title, All Hands on Tech, Citizen Revolution in Business Technology.
Awesome. I love it. Well, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Good to see you again, and wish you the best.
Thanks for having me on, Brad. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C Blue Prism. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of intelligent automation, subscribe now. The future of work is here.